Welcome to Culture Matters. In this video, we're going to take a deep dive into the current state of inflation. Inflation is a crucial economic indicator that affects the prices of goods and services, the value of money, and the purchasing power of consumers. It's a complex and dynamic phenomenon that can have far-reaching consequences for the economy and for everyday life. As you may know, inflation has been rising in many countries around the world, and it has become a hot topic of discussion among economists, analysts, and policymakers. In this video, we're going to analyze the latest trends and forecasts to understand the current inflation situation. We'll explore the causes of inflation, the effects on different segments of the population, and on different sectors of the economy, and the actions being taken by central banks to address the current situation.
This video is a must-watch for anyone who wants to stay informed and make sense of the world around them. Whether you're an economist, student, or just a curious and open-minded individual, you'll find valuable insights and information in this video. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into the world of inflation. Don't forget to check out the subtitles or captions for those who are hearing impaired or for those who prefer to watch the video in a different language.
So, what causes inflation? There are a number of factors that can contribute to inflation, but some of the most important include economic growth, supply and demand, monetary policy, and government policies. First, let's talk about economic growth. When an economy is growing, there is an increase in demand for goods and services, which can lead to higher prices. This is because as the number of people with money to spend increases, the prices of goods and services go up to meet that demand. Another important factor is the relationship between supply and demand. When the demand for goods and services exceeds the supply, prices go up. For example, when there is a drought and crops fail, the supply of food decreases, and the prices of food go up. Monetary policy, which is the management of a country's money supply by its central bank, also plays a role in inflation. Central banks can influence inflation by adjusting interest rates and controlling the money supply. Finally, government policies can also affect inflation. For example, if a government increases taxes or spends more money than it takes in, it can lead to inflation. These are just a few examples of the factors that can contribute to inflation. It's important to remember that inflation is a complex and dynamic phenomenon that can be affected by a variety of different factors. By understanding the causes of inflation, we can better understand the current situation and make informed decisions.
Now that we've discussed the causes of inflation, let's talk about the effects it can have on different segments of the population and on different sectors of the economy. One of the most obvious effects of inflation is on purchasing power. As prices go up, consumers have less money to spend on goods and services, which means they can't buy as much as they could before. This can lead to a decline in living standards. Another effect of inflation is on interest rates. When inflation is high, interest rates tend to go up as well. This can make it more expensive for people to borrow money, and it can also affect investments. For example, if you have money in a savings account, you may earn less interest on that money if interest rates go down. Inflation can also affect different sectors of the economy differently. For example, if the prices of raw materials go up, it can make it more expensive for manufacturers to produce goods. This can lead to higher prices for consumers and lower profits for manufacturers. On the other hand, if the prices of goods and services go up, it can lead to higher profits for businesses. Inflation can also have different effects on different segments of the population. For example, retirees and people on fixed incomes may be more affected by inflation than people who are still working. This is because their incomes are not increasing as fast as prices are going up. It's important to understand the effects of inflation so that you can make informed decisions about your finances, investments, and living standard. The effects of inflation can be complicated. It's important to keep in mind that different groups of people can be affected differently by inflation.
Now that we've discussed the causes and effects of inflation, let's talk about the actions being taken by central banks to address the current inflation situation. Central banks have a number of tools at their disposal to control inflation, including adjusting interest rates and controlling the money supply. One of the main tools used by central banks to control inflation is adjusting interest rates. When inflation is high, central banks will typically raise interest rates. This makes borrowing money more expensive, which can slow down economic growth and reduce inflation. Another tool central banks use to control inflation is controlling the money supply. Central banks can increase or decrease the amount of money in circulation by buying or selling government bonds. This can affect the price of money and impact inflation. Central banks also use other tools like quantitative easing, which involves buying assets such as bonds from banks and other financial institutions, in order to increase the money supply and boost the economy. It's important to note that the actions taken by central banks to address inflation can have both positive and negative effects on the economy. For example, raising interest rates can slow down economic growth, but it can also reduce inflation. It's important to stay informed about the actions being taken by central banks and to understand their potential effects on the economy and on your personal finances. Central banks have multiple tools to control inflation, but the decision of which tool to use and when depends on the specific situation of each country.
Now that we've discussed the causes, effects, and actions taken by central banks to address inflation, let's talk about the forecast for the future and the possible ways to address it. Forecasting inflation is not an easy task, and it can be influenced by multiple factors, including economic growth, supply and demand, monetary policy, and government policies. However, based on the current situation and the actions taken by central banks, experts predict that inflation will remain elevated in the short term but will stabilize in the long term. To address inflation, experts suggest several actions that can be taken by central banks, government, and individuals. Central banks can continue to use the tools they have at their disposal, such as adjusting interest rates and controlling the money supply, to control inflation. They can also improve communication with the public and be more transparent about their inflation target and the actions they plan to take to achieve it. Governments can also take actions to address inflation by implementing policies that increase productivity and supply, such as investing in infrastructure and education. Individuals can also take actions to protect themselves from inflation by diversifying their investments, saving more, and reducing debt. It's important to keep in mind that addressing inflation is not a one-time event, it's a continuous process that involves multiple actors and multiple actions. By staying informed and taking the appropriate actions, we can mitigate the negative effects of inflation and maintain stability in the economy.
In this video, we've discussed the causes, effects, and actions taken to address inflation, as well as the forecast for the future and the possible ways to mitigate its negative effects. We've covered the importance of staying informed and taking the appropriate actions to maintain stability in the economy. Inflation is a complex and constantly changing phenomenon, and it's important to remember that addressing inflation is not a one-time event but rather a continuous process that involves multiple actors and multiple actions. Central banks, governments, and individuals all have a role to play in addressing inflation and maintaining economic stability. It's important to be aware of the current inflation situation and to understand the actions being taken by central banks, governments, and how they might affect you and your personal finances. By staying informed and making informed decisions, you can protect yourself from the negative effects of inflation and take advantage of the opportunities it presents. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more engaging and enlightening content on economic and cultural matters.